And sometimes you can use the graphics to make important decisions, okay, pertaining to the patient's status on the ventilator or the ventilator itself. Okay? So they're not just there for decoration to make it look good. They do mean something. Okay, so objectives of this lecture: identify graphic display options provided by mechanical ventilators, describe how to use graphics to more appropriately adjust the patient ventilator interface. Uses of flow, volume, and pressure waveform data. We can use it to confirm how well a mode is functioning. Okay? We can use it to detect auto beep, determine patient ventilator synchrony or asynchrony, assess and adjust trigger levels, measure the work of breathing, adjust tidal volume and minimize overdistension, assess the effect of bronchodilator administration, detect equipment malfunctions, determine appropriate PEEP level, evaluate adequacy of inspiratory time in pressure control ventilation, determine the presence and rate of continuous leak, assess inspiratory termination criteria during pressure support ventilation. And that is your expiratory sensitivity or the inspiratory cycle off. Okay? That's what terminates pressure support breath. Determine appropriate rise time. So the pressure, the flow, and the time are measured parameters on the ventilator. We have what we call the pressure transducer that measures the amount of pressure going to the patient and the pressure coming back from the patient. We have what we call the flow transducer that measures the amount of flow, like when the flow comes out from the ventilator, it runs through there, and then the ventilator knows how much flow is coming out. When it's coming back from the patient, we also measure it. Inside the ventilator, you have what they call a rate timer. Okay, a small clock there that measures time. Okay, that's the way that the ventilator is able to calculate the total cycle time and stuff. Okay, and then these other ones here are calculated from the first three. Okay, the tidal volume, the compliance, the resistance, walk up breathing, and the auto peak. Okay, so waveform or scalar. Okay, that is the graph of any of the variables, the tidal volume, the flow, and the pressure against time. When you plot the graph of tidal volume, pressure, or flow against time, it is called a waveform or scalar. But when you plot the graph of tidal volume against flow, okay, or tidal volume against pressure, that would be a loop. So a loop is you're plotting a graph between the two, for the two variables, okay? A scalar or waveform will be when you plot any of the variables against time, okay? So now, so these will be the scalar or the waveform: pressure versus time, flow versus time, volume versus time. Okay, so let's do the scalar, then we'll do the loops for the second lecture. Okay, so now on volume controlled mode, what you're going to see is the graph looks like this. Okay, and this is time, and this is volume. Okay, excuse me, we're doing pressure. This is pressure here. Okay, so what happens is that as at the beginning of inspiration, okay, as pressure rises over time. Here's your inspiratory time here. and then as pressure rises, the volume increases until you get to the PIP. And so that's what you're looking at. So every volume controlled mode, the pressure time curve should look like this. SIMV, VC, ACVC. Okay? Pressure will rise like that as the time increases to get to your high time. So that's what you're looking at right here. Okay? So now if you can see now, this is my baseline. Okay, baseline is the point from which pressure begins to rise. Like if I have a P of 5 set, PEEP of 5 sets, my baseline pressure is 5 because I already have that amount of pressure inside my lungs. Then any other pressure I'm breathing in is in addition to that. Okay, so that's where my pressure is going to begin to rise. So now you can see here that you have an elevated baseline. This is supposed to be 0 here. So this patient's got like a PEEP of 5. So during inspiration, pressure rises gradually and gets to peak, and then the patient exhales out all the way here, and then they take another inspiration. Okay? So now if you look at it, my eye time will be from here. So down here is my time. So if I want to measure my eye time, it will be from the green area, from here to here. Draw a line down here. Let me cut this off. Let me see that. That's better. So this is my eye time from A to B. Okay, right here. I'll draw a line here. Okay. This is my expiratory time. From here, this is where the patient started to exhale out, and then up to here. So from here to here will be my expiratory time. The highest point here is my PIP. Okay? And again, this is my baseline pressure of 5. Okay, so on the exam, they may show you this and tell you how much PEEP is the patient on. Well, if it's elevated 10 points, then a PEEP of 10. If it's elevated 15 points, then a PEEP of 15. And here's my mean airway pressure, which is the average pressure under a respiratory cycle, inspiration and exhalation, your mean airway pressure. Okay, so that's different for pressure control. So this will be pressure time curve on pressure control mode. Okay? Well, for that, here's the time here, here's the pressure. For pressure control, we're setting pressure. So during inspiration, pressure rises to the set value and then stays constant throughout the time for inspiration before the patient begins to exhale out. Now you can see how it's curving like that. That's your rise time that is causing it to be that way. Your rise time. If my rise time was set at 0, it would be just like a straight line up. It will shoot up straight like that. But rise time is pressure slope. We're sloping the pressure. How fast it's going to get to the patient or how slowly it's going to get to the patient. Okay. The more you turn up your rise time, the slower it will go like that. But if you have your rise time at 0, what you're going to see is like that. It shoots out like that. Okay? So if we didn't have the rise time, then this would be like a square. Okay? But either way you go, the pressure is going to have to go to the set value and then stays constant throughout the time for inspiration before the patient exhales out. Okay, so now, anytime you look at the pressure time curve and you see that negative deflection, okay, like that, negative deflection, that means that the patient triggered the breath. Okay, if it's a machine breath that the patient did not trigger, you won't see that. Okay, but sometimes patients can trigger both machine breath or spontaneous breath. If you are on a spontaneous mode, all of them will look like that, like pressure support, when the patient is triggering all the breaths, you're gonna see that negative deflection before the pressure goes up. Okay, so, and then the amount of deep down will depend on your sensitivity level. Like if I set it on -3, well, I expect this here to go down further, okay, before it goes up. If I set it on -1, well, it will not go down as much compared to -3 before it goes up. So that's how we know which breath is spontaneous, by looking at the deflection to the negative direction. Okay, so if you're on a volume controlled mode, you have to set flow. You always set flow on the volume control mode because the flow multiplies your I time and gives you your target tidal volume. Okay, you want a target tidal volume, therefore you're going to set a target flow. The flow doesn't change. It's a limited value on the ventilator because you're always going to need it to achieve that tidal volume that you're trying to control. So, sometimes what happens is the therapist may not set enough flow. Now, normal inspiratory flow is 30 to 60 liters per minute, like when you're going like that on the ventilator. Now, some books, like your review book, will say from 25 to 60. Okay, not that much difference, okay? But now, if I set a tidal volume of 800, okay, but I only set a flow of 20, that will not work. The ventilator will not behave well. Because it means that you're going to have to lengthen your I time to use that low flow to get your tidal volume. So you almost have to set a flow rate that is adequate for the tidal volume that you're going to achieve. How do you know that? Well, you're going to have a normal I to E ratio. Okay, any flow rate that you set that achieves an I to E ratio of at least 1 to 2 is good range of flow. Okay, that's the best way to do it. Okay, otherwise your I to E ratio will be inverse ratio, and patients usually don't tolerate that well unless you sedate them. Okay, so this is what normal flow will look like. Okay, it will look like a very smooth linear rise in the curve. That green area will be very smooth. That tells you that the flow rate is good. But this is what it's going to look like if you don't have enough flow. You kind of go like that. Okay, so if you look at your flow time curve, and then you see it this way, instead of very smooth, straight, linear rise in flow, that would mean that you have to increase your flow. So the patient will be very, very breath hungry here. Okay? So this is what they call the air starvation. Again, meaning that you don't have enough flow. So this is what is supposed to be normal. Okay, so this is the way it's going up. Okay? Now, breath starvation, you can tell on the ventilator, because the patient will try to fight the ventilator. Each time the ventilator cycles, the patient will do that, trying to do that. They're fighting the ventilator just because they're not getting enough flow. If you don't set enough flow rate, that's what your patient is going to be doing, okay? Because they're trying to get more flow in. So that's the starvation there. Okay, so this is where you are checking your plateau pressure. Okay, plateau pressure. So right here, if you want to check your plateau pressure on volume control mode, you do your inspiratory pause, and then you're going to have your PIP, and then you're going to have your plateau here. But you have to hold it long enough to get true plateau pressure. Okay? Usually on most ventilators, the maximum allowed is 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That's maximum allowed. If you hold that button for more than 30 seconds, the ventilator is going to ignore you. Because, once you press it, this is what you're doing to the patient. Like that. So after 20 seconds, the ventilator is going to say, well, I'm not going to fool with you. I'm not going to do that patient like that. And then it will ignore you and go back to what it was doing before. Okay, so maximum 30 seconds back. You have to hold it long enough, and then when you hold it long enough, this is what it's supposed to look like. Okay, on volume control mode. So this is my PIP, and then this is my plateau. Plateau should always be lower than PIP, always. That's how come static compliance should always be greater than dynamic compliance, because you're dividing with a smaller number. Okay? And the difference between your PIP and your plateau is what we call the trans-airway pressure. The pressure lost due to airway resistance. Remember, airway resistance is PIP minus plateau divided by flow. So the bigger the margin between the two of them, the higher your airway resistance will be. Okay? So when you want to do plateau pressure, hold it long enough, but not more than 30 seconds. Okay? Okay, so this curve here is for volume control. We are doing now the flow time curve. We are done doing the pressure time curve for volume and pressure control modes. So this is what the flow time curve, so if you look at that screen, for every breath taken, you're gonna have pressure time curve, you're gonna have flow time curve, you're gonna have volume time curve. Those are the three types of graphs drawn. And then you can change it and look at your loops too, okay? So now if you're on volume control, you will see something like this. Okay, now whatever you set is going to be constant. Whatever you set is going to be constant. So on a volume control mode, you are setting your flow, therefore the flow will be the same from beginning to the end. That's a limiting value. A limiting value is a variable that doesn't change from the beginning of inspiration to the end of inspiration. Okay? So now, at the beginning of inspiration, flow quickly rises to preset, stays the same throughout inspiration, drops back down before the patient exhales. The yellow line is exhalation, below the baseline here, exhalation. Okay? So on the next breath, the same thing, pressure will rise to the set value. It's supposed to stay constant because you're trying to guarantee a volume, and then comes down, then the patient exhales. Okay? Now, let me tell you this here. On some ventilators like the Puritan Bennett 980, on a volume control mode, you can actually pick the type of flow that you want to use. Because now they're coming up with descending ramp. Okay, descending ramp. Okay, so this is the square waveform. Okay, the advantage to this here is that it will guarantee a constant I to E ratio. It will guarantee a constant I to E ratio for the square waveform. Okay, or square flow pattern. Okay, but the disadvantage is that there is likelihood of barotrauma because the PIP tends to be higher from beginning to the end. Okay? So at the hospitals, they don't like to use the square flow pattern. Okay, because it creates a higher PIP. We can then predispose the patient to developing barotrauma. But it will guarantee a constant I to E ratio. Okay? Another thing with this is that it doesn't promote an even distribution of air inside the lung field. Okay? The distribution of air is not as good, okay, with the constant flow pattern. Now this is the descending ramp here. Okay, so you can find this when you're on volume control, like on the 980, you can, it says like flow type. You can pick this or you can pick this, okay? So on this one here now, what is going on is the beginning flow is not the ending flow. Okay? This one here, the beginning flow is the ending flow. So it goes to 40, it rises to 40 immediately, and then as inspiration progresses, the flow will begin to decrease. Okay? That's what we call it the descending ramp. As inspiration progresses, the flow will begin to decrease. On this one here, 40 all the way. This one here gets to 40 and then it begins to decrease as inspiration progresses until the end of inspiration. Okay. So this is what is good. This is what is the best. Okay. It doesn't create a whole lot of PIP. Therefore, the risk of barotrauma is very low. It promotes a distribution of gas all over the lung field. Okay? So the default flow pattern on that ventilator is this here. Okay? It's always a default. And then if you want to go to this, you can go. Okay? Any questions about that? So descending ramp or the constant flow pattern? Okay, so now, this here is inspiratory time from here to here, and then you have a little half in here before the patient begins to exhale. So this is like pause, okay? You are using too much eye time, because see, the patient is done breathing in here, but still some time left for inspiration. So anytime you see this, you need to decrease your eye time. That means that the patient has more eye time than they really need. Okay, that's what that means. Okay, there's always a pause, unless you intentionally set a pause time. Okay, otherwise it will be too much eye time. Okay, this is the most important of everything that we're doing today because it's always on the exam. That's air trapping, okay? You see it there because as a respiratory therapist, you're supposed to know when your patient is air trapping, okay? Now, so this is inspiration from here to here. This is exhalation here. Now, anytime the patient gets to exhaling out, and there is any flow left in their lungs, then they're doing air trapping. Okay? So this exhalation curve here must return to baseline here before the next inspiration. If the expiratory flow does not return to baseline before the next inspiration, then the patient is doing air trapping. So this will be air trapping here when you see something like this. Because it's supposed to go all the way up here before the next inspiration. So, on the exam, they can say, well, the patient is on volume control mode, and then they show you this. You say, well, what is going on here? Well, you're going to say air trapping. Well, they say, well, how are you going to fix it? Then one of the things you're going to look for on a volume control mode is to increase the flow. That shortens your eye time and lengthens your E time. Well, if they don't give you that choice, they may tell you to decrease your respiratory rate. That would be a good answer, okay? Because the lower your respiratory rate, the more expiratory time that you're going to have. So I want you to remember that. That's auto PEEP, air trapping, inadvertent PEEP, intrinsic PEEP, whatever you want to call it, okay? Okay, so the same thing here. You can see that here, the expiratory flow did not return back to baseline before the next inspiration. So this patient is doing air trapping, okay? Okay, so this here just tells you when the eye time is too short or too long, okay? This is what is normal here, okay, that's normal. Now you can tell where the eye time stopped right here, way up here. Okay, that's the eye time. The patient started exhaling from here, so that would be a shorter eye time. That's normal. And then this is a longer item. The patient is already done breathing in, but there's still some time left. Okay? So with this here, you are either going to decrease your eye time, but that's too long. Okay? Unless you intentionally set a pause time. You want your patient to hold their breath each time. Okay, so now, volume time curve. Okay? So this will be inspiration, exhalation. That's the way the volume time curve will look. Inspiration, exhalation. Okay, this is a bunch of it. You see how it's bending down here a little bit? Coming down? Sometimes COPD patients look that way. That's expiratory resistance. As the flow rate is coming out from their lungs, there's a little bit of hesitation due to their airway. And that causes the third to bend a little bit. Okay? Okay, so this is missed inspiration. The patient is triggering, but nothing is happening. Okay? Maybe because you have a lot of water inside the ventilator socket. Okay? That will cause it. Maybe you have, on the HME, you have a bunch of water in there. Okay? The ventilator cannot sense the patient inspiration as much. Okay? So the patient is trying to get a breath triggering, but the ventilator is not responding. Okay? So that would be missed inspiration. Or missed trigger. Okay, so this is polycycling. Okay? What causes this is maybe there is a leak in the circuit, or maybe the sensitivity is set too high. Okay? And then the ventilator just turns on and off without you doing anything. You can kind of wave at it, it comes on. Okay, so when they show you this, it's usually decrease your sensitivity. Okay? If you don't see that, then look for drain water in this ventilator socket. Okay, or the trigger. Okay, so now what we're going to do, let's quickly draw this here. Just draw them. So I'm going to go. Okay, so now we're gonna do a AC VC mode. Okay? Now, for the pressure time curve an AC VC mode, okay? Well, remember on assist control, the patient can trigger or the machine can trigger, okay? So let's say that the first breath, the ventilator triggers, it goes like that, it comes down like that. That's the pressure. Now, if the patient triggers, you see that negative deflection before the pressure goes up. Here's another one, the patient triggered. So that's the way the pressure time curve will look like. Okay, so the flow time curve there, I'm setting my flow. It will look like that. They will always be the same height because it's the same flow rate. Okay, they'll be the same height. And then the volume time curve for that is going to look like this. Remember, we're controlling volume, so the volume will be the same. The exact other one will be about the same, so they will be of the same height. Kind of like pointed. Okay? So if you set your patient on the ACDC mode and you're looking at the scaler, that's exactly what it's going to look like. Okay? Any questions about that? Well, let's do SIMVVC, pressure support.
Hi, Dr. O, may I distribute RAD badges?
Huh?
Can I distribute RAD
Yeah,
badges?
yeah.
Thank
I
you.
thought you said you wanted to give me some. SIMVVC pressure support. Okay, now remember SIMVVC is a volume controlled mode, but you can set pressure support with it. And the pressure support that you're setting is only going to be used when the patient takes a spontaneous breath. Because the pressure support is only helping to reduce the airway resistance imposed by the artificial airway so that the patient can suck more flow from the ventilator. So now let's say that here, the ventilator cycled and gave a machine breath like that. Okay? And then on the next breath, the patient triggered, which is what we call the assisted breath, assisted machine breath. And you got a machine breath like that. And then on the next breath, the patient took a spontaneous breath. Remember, we set the pressure support, so it has to be a constant waveform. It's pressure ventilation. So now, if it goes like this, that will be pressure supported breath. Pressure rises to the set value, stays constant throughout the phase of inspiration, and then it comes down. Okay? And then let's say on the next breath again, the patient took another spontaneous breath. They're going to use that pressure support. You're going to see it like that. And then on the next breath, the machine triggered and gave a machine breath. So it's going to look like that. Okay? Now, if the patient is not breathing spontaneously on their own, on the SIMVVC mode, it looks like assist control. Okay? Anytime there is time, it will come on and it gives the breath. Okay? It will look like this. Every one of them will look like this. You will not have this if the patient is not breathing spontaneously. Okay? So you come here to the flow, where this is a machine breath. We're guaranteeing tidal volume, therefore, the flow we have to guarantee as well. So it's going to look like this. Here's another machine breath. We are guaranteeing tidal volume, therefore the flow will be the same. Well, here is a pressure supported breath. On pressure support, remember, we don't set flow. Okay, we don't set flow. The ventilator brings out the amount of flow it wants to bring out, according to how well the patient can suck in. Okay? So, when you look at it, it will be what we call decelerating ramp. Okay, so it goes like this. It goes like that. Okay, so what they call this is, they call it exponential decay. That's what they call it. Kind of kills down like that. Now, notice here now that this here does not go all the way down to the baseline, like this one here did. This is your expiratory sensitivity. That's what it does, okay? Now, that expiratory sensitivity, what it does is determine the amount of flow rate at which the patient can begin to exhale out. Okay, so this is the way it works. Let's say that my patient took a pressure supported breath, they go like that. And then the initial flow that they got when they went like that is 60 liters per minute. That's the initial flow, okay? And then your expiratory sensitivity, you have it set on 25%, okay? So what you're telling the ventilator is that when the flow rate drops to 25% of the initial flow that the patient got, I want the patient to begin to exhale out. So what's going to happen is the patient goes here, and then the flow will begin to drop. And then what's 25% of 60? That's about 15. Let's say 15 is about right here. It drops down here, and then the patient exhales out. Okay? If you set it to 30%, it means that it's going to drop down some more before the patient exhales out. Okay? So that expiratory sensitivity is used to cycle off spontaneous breaths. Okay? You gotta be careful setting that because the optimal setting is 25 to 30%. Now, let's say that I set my expiratory sensitivity to 50%, and my patient got 60. Well, it's gonna drop down to 50% of the initial flow, which is 60. Here's my 30 here. So what's gonna happen is that the patient's eye time is going to be shorter. It's going to be real short because the thing is cycling off earlier. Okay. Well, that means then that tidal volume equals flow times time. That means that the patient's tidal volume is going to decrease because they don't have enough eye time to suck out the flow from the ventilator. See? But now, let's say if I set it very low, I set it at 10%. So that means then that the flow rate would have to decrease almost to baseline here before the patient exhales. What have I done to my eye time? Well, my eye time has lengthened. And then my E time is shorter now. Is that good for a COPD patient? No. So if you don't set that right, patients can air trap. Okay, or maybe they won't get enough tidal volume. So that's why the optimal setting is about 25 to 30%. Very easy to think about because if you start breathing in now, okay, as your lungs fill up with air, the amount of flow coming into your lungs will decrease. For us, it's 5%. When your flow rate decreases to 5%, okay, of the initial flow that you get, you will stop breathing. Okay? So that's why we say that pressure support mode is flow cycled. It is flow cycled. Okay, because flow is what gets it out of inspiration. Okay? All right, so right here, there's another pressure supported breath. Exponential decay. Right here, my expiratory sensitivity will cycle off here. And then I have my machine breath, which is going to look like that. Okay? So that's the flow time curve. Now, if the patient is not breathing spontaneously, then you won't see this. They will all look like that. And then for the volume, here's my machine breath pointed like that. Another machine breath like that, the same volume, because we're controlling volume. Pressure support, well, that's not a machine tidal volume. That's the patient's tidal volume. They always look kind of like rounded like that. Okay? On pressure support, the tidal volume varies. The exhale tidal volume varies. So on the next breath, you may see something like that. When they get huge tidal volume, like that. Or maybe smaller than that when they don't take enough eye time to breathe in. Okay, so the tidal volume is everywhere on pressure support. And then you have another machine breath. So that's the way SIMV VC is going to look like, pressure support. Now let's do pressure control. So pressure control AC, PC. Okay, here's my pressure time curve, pressure time. Well, on pressure control, ACPC, the patient can trigger, the machine can do it. So, but the only difference is that you're always gonna have the pressure rising to the set value. So here, the machine did it, triggered, it goes like that. The pressure has to remain the same throughout the phase of inspiration. That's why we call it pressure control. And then on the next one, the patient triggered, like that. Okay. Let's say that now you decide to set your rise time. This is without rise time. It's going to shoot out straight like that. If I have rise time, then it's going to go, but the pressure will still be the same. Now, this is your rise time here. That's what the rise time does. It slopes the pressure. Another name for it is pressure slope. Okay, that's another name for rise time, pressure slope. Okay, and then you go to your flow time curve here. Do we set flow on pressure control? No, we don't. Okay, so it cannot be square. Because you see here we set pressure, pressure is square. Since we don't set flow, we can't expect to have a square flow pattern. So it will look that exponential decay, pressure comes out, and this time now, remember this is not a spontaneous mode, so we're not going to set the expiratory sensitivity. The expiratory sensitivity is only available for you to set on a spontaneous mode. So this is going to come all the way to baseline, like that. Okay? That's the major difference between pressure control and pressure support. So that's what pressure control is going to look like. Okay? And then volume time curve, well, that's a controlled mode. You're using the same I time. The tidal volume will be relatively constant unless there is a change in compliance or resistance. Okay? So it's like that. If for some reason you have a decrease in lung compliance or increase in airway resistance, you're going to find out that your tidal volume will decrease like that. If you have an increase in lung compliance or decrease in airway resistance, you get a huge tidal volume like that. Other than that, the tidal volume will be very close together. Okay? Any questions about that? That's the way pressure control looks. And then there is, when you say too much rise time, so if you look at your pressure time curve and you see something like this, like that. That's you need to increase your rise time, because what this here means is that the air is shooting out very fast from the ventilator. That's what makes that description there. Okay, you need to increase your rise time, you need to slope it some more. Okay? And then finally we have pressure support. Pressure support is that one that says PS as C path. So pressure time count for that. Okay, so we're setting pressure, okay? So the pressure goes to the airway and holds the airway open. So you're always gonna have the step pressure rising there. But it's spontaneous mode, so every one of them is gonna have that indentation like that. patient is triggering all the breath, like that. Okay? And then you go to flow time curve for that. We don't set flow on pressure support, so it cannot be square waveform. It will have to be an exponential decay, like, and every one of them will have that expiratory sensitivity because the flow never makes it down to zero. Okay? Patient exhales. Okay, that's what the flow time curve is going to look like. And then for volume time curve, when the tidal volume varies there, according to patient lung compliance and resistance. So you may see that on this breath, that on the next breath, that on the next breath, that, like that. The tidal volume is everywhere. Okay? Any questions about that? And then there's one more, there is a CPAP. CPAP is without pressure support, like that. If you want your patient to go to CPAP, you turn your pressure support or pressure level to 0 on that mode. And then the patient will just be on PEEP. They're just breathing above the baseline, that's all. Okay? Continuous positive airway pressure. So on that one, pressure time curve usually looks like this. Of course, it's going to have that intention because that's a spontaneous mode. CPAP is a spontaneous mode. Like that. Okay? And then for the flow time curve, what we call that is the sine flow pattern. The sine flow pattern. So it will look like this, a spontaneous breathing. We'll call it the sine. Is that how you pronounce that, sine?
That's what I've always said.
That's what I always call it, sine. It's not direct sine, but this sine here, sine flow pattern. Okay? Any questions about the scalar? And then I showed you the air trapping. You have to know that one. So another question is, if a respiratory therapist wants to find out whether a patient is air trapping on the ventilator, you look at your flow time curve. Remember that. Flow time curve is what you look at, because basically what it means is that if your expiratory flow is not returning to baseline before the next inspiration, then you have air trapping. On the volume controlled mode, increase the flow, that shortens your I time and lengthens your E time. Or maybe they don't give you that, you decrease the respiratory rate. On the pressure control mode, we don't set flow, so the only choice you really have there is to decrease your respiratory rate. Okay? Any questions about that? All right, let's knock out the other.